In today's world, we all know there's enough films that portray teenagers. But the real question is, how meaningful is that representation? Do movies produced reflect teenagers from all walks of life? Are representations of their lives accurate? And what aspects of their lives do production houses focus on? To answer these questions, we have a very special guest today, Pranav Anand.
Welcome to the podcast, Pranav. For those of you that don't know him, Pranav is a very distinguished university debater who has debated for multiple universities in the past and won multiple competitions. He also happens to be a data migration specialist for the United States government, a top master student from Purdue University, and importantly, he has a degree in film studies from Emory University in the United States. We're very happy to have you, Pranav. Let's jump right into the first question then.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So, for the first question, Pranav, do you think it's fair that adults and old producers get to write about teenagers' lives and shape the way they think, as opposed to teenagers themselves directing how they want their lives to be portrayed in movies and media?
Um, I think the obvious answer is probably not. It doesn't seem very reasonable for older individuals to decide what younger people's portrayals look like. But there are some pretty obvious logistical complications with asking teenagers to write for themselves. The most obvious one being that there's like it's very rife with abuse if you allow teenagers to portray themselves because they would still at some level need to involve adults, right? Like you still need to like get money to build out a film or like just write it up or like have production values. And the problem then is like if kids are doing most of the writing and the directing and the releasing of it themselves, like some level the obvious complications are like how does this work with school? What does this work when you don't have enough time? But the other bigger thing is just that you have even less supervision. Like there's even, let's say, rules around like protecting children, like child actors, for example. If children are also doing the directing and are also doing the writing. So at some level, it's physically impossible for kids to be directing or writing their own movies and get them produced at a huge stage. You would need like a lot of adult supervision there to ensure that they're being protected. And like even basic stuff like writing up a contract. So usually, like I think what ends up being the good middle ground balance, which hopefully we're moving more towards, is either A, kids get to do stuff like YouTube videos. So they are either influencers themselves or just talk about what their lives look like. And that allows for like more bootleg, but also probably more honest or authentic versions of what it means to be a teenager. Secondly, which is if they really do want to like do things like short films, there are probably some film festivals in some countries that allow you to, put that film festival out there, film out there, and that is helpful. Um, However, I think that part of the issue is logistics, but I think even if we talk about the quality of the film, it's quite different. It's quite difficult to say. Like obviously, adults do not have always a very good or accurate understanding of what life is like in a school or what teenagers are experiencing. And adults obviously have like pretty bad biases because they are also worried about their own reputation if they try and be like too truthful to how teenagers are talking or thinking among themselves or with each other, or like even just showing like bad behavior is sometimes not always like considered appropriate. But on the other hand, like teenagers may also not be very good at portraying themselves when it comes to like making a movie. At some level, this is just because like some of the basic things, just like knowing how to write a story in a good way with a proper character arc, ensuring that there is good production value behind the scenes, like the lighting is correct and that sort of stuff. It takes a lot of time to learn, a lot of time to understand, a ton of practice. Like already I think we know so many movies made by adults that are like pretty bad just in general from production standpoint. So like kids doing this themselves sounds like really really hard to do, so it's not even clear that the quality of the picture would be better. So yes, I think it's not great that adults have a lot of control. It's not immediately apparent that teenagers versions of this would instead have been better.
That's fair. I also think like bouncing off of that, like if it is true that it continues to be like a logistical issue that like teenagers themselves obviously like can't be that much involved in like writing scripts or like making these movies. I think there's a conversation to be had about like which kind of stereotypes about teenagers have persisted in media for decades and like why you personally think they continue to endure even though we have like more involvement of kids and like a trend towards them being more involved in discourse surrounding media, for instance.
Yeah, there are quite a few stereotypes. They have changed a bit over time. I think some of the ones that are still really like pervasive or prominent are one. I feel there is often a tendency to over sexualize kids, or to like over adult them. So like typical shows like Euphoria, for example, are pretty obvious at showing, say, like kids indulging in significant amounts of, say, drug abuse, or like having like sexualized lighting around them, particularly young women, unfortunately. Um, this is like obviously it's quite terrible and quite wrong. And I think it's unfortunately happening because a lot of times they cast adults as like teenage actors and can try to get away with them. To some extent, I see where this is coming from. Like there is just so much history of like bad, like so much abuse of child actors, either like literally in terms of like being sexually exploited, um on screen or off, but even in like a more subtle or coercive ways, right? Like their contracts are written up by other adults or strangers. Sometimes their parents who put them into this profession have like serious mental health conditions. There's like a good book by like an actress called Jeanette McCurdy, and she was on like the TV show iCarly, and she faced like a ton of abuse from her mother. And even though that is probably a somewhat extreme example, a lot of the things she points out to are like endemic within the industry, like within the film industry. But that to come back to the point, that's to say, like, it's quite obvious that there's going to be some objectification or adultifying. I think the other like bad set of stereotypes is just like absurdly like rebellious, which is probably not like very realistic. This I think is a rather long-standing um type of trope. Like I feel it's been existing since the 80s. Like anyone who's seen like a James Dean movie in Hollywood, or like there's like a 1990s movie called The Outsiders by John Hughes. Like John Hughes just became like really popular in Hollywood for like a bunch of these sort of movies. There's Ferris Bueller Days Off. They are pretty fun, like they are counter-revolutionary and that sort of stuff. But they also run the risk of like either excessively glamorizing things that are objectively not very healthy or ideal to do, like stealing your dad's car and like breaking it is probably it's not a very great thing to do. Um, but also like it does still feel or it rings a little bit hollow. And I think in today the way it manifests in a lot of movies is like they use absurd, way like excessive amounts of slang that might be famous on like TikTok, on like on social media, but that the actual teenagers, in my experience, like only use it to like some percentage. Like they still communicate in relatively regular or normal ways. So the point basically is that when you're an adult, you can run the risk when you're creating the script or like promoting the movie as a studio executive to be like, either we have to go way too far and like try and be as quote unquote relatable or as current or as in the zeitgeist and just like overuse these words in pointless or stupid ways, or they just feel like they're gonna like miss out. So this means that kids can, at bare minimum, like I said, I'm using kids, but like teenagers in media, they can at bare minimum feel like really cringe or over the top, and at worst they can feel like actively problematic, like over sexualized, like excessive romanticization of like drug problems or of like suicide problems. Unfortunately, I think 13 Reasons Why is a good show. It's a bad show, but it's a show that exemplifies how badly one can portray suicide on media. So there are like many of those kinds of stereotypes I think that are there. Yeah, so those might be like some broad highlights.
That makes sense. I think like a personal anecdote of that is like there's this new like teen horror film that like Addison Rae and like some other influencers made on Netflix or something. And it's the most hilarious use of slang ever. Like they like using words like, oh, you're cooked, or like this is like aura or whatever. And it's like the funniest way to use it. And it's such hilarious misuse that like to some extent when you're trying to represent teenagers, like I think the worst way to do it possible is like try to use their lingo or whatever. Like often it tends to not just be outdated, but also like it's forced into the script. Like it's like someone who was the producer told the writer, "Hey, you need to have at least 20 slang words in these 30 minutes in this movie." And it's like those feel very like forced and like they just don't feel good, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like, I think those are also examples where, because technically you would think they'd be better, because even though she's a very privileged and out of touch, like 20 something year old, she was a teenager who did like live in the time, and she did get popular first and foremost among teenagers with like her TikTok videos. But I think the problem is like either A, it's really easy to not actually involve that much input from the actor themselves when you're making the movie. Or two, which is the actors themselves become different, because this is pretty important. Like a lot of the teenagers who become famous at some level don't really speak to or relate as much to teenagers anymore beyond a couple of really close friends, right? Like when you get swept up like in the whole system of like public, like publicists and like agents and like setting up a movies or like going to a premiere or a party or something. Like you just stop, like you don't do school in the regular way. You get homeschooled, for example. So like a lot of the basic information you have about life is very limited, and what you have way more of is like online slang, which I think disproportionately has slang, I think, because obviously when it's online, part of the point is like just trying to be funny and like trying to be like a little bit like silly or quippy with like a one-liner comment. So people make the mistake of assuming that like the comments you see under a Facebook post or a TikTok video, Facebook post, so sorry, also like a TikTok video is like indicative of how people talk in real life, but it isn't. It's deliberately hyper stylized. I will say I think the movies that are better at doing this are actually usually non-Western ones. So like I can't remember some of the names, but like there are a couple of South Korean movies that I feel are a little bit more naturalistic and real. They are also either at times a little bit more like depressing at times. But I do feel like they are good because they're not trying too hard. Like they're not being a bunch of tryhards. So that I think is a helpful note. But I feel in the West, I also feel Bollywood is also really bad when it comes to portraying teenagers whenever they do so, which is very rare, I think. Um, but yeah, there are some industries that are a little bit better.
That makes complete sense. So there's a bunch of movies that where like directors and producers try like making the movie as relatable as possible to teenagers. And there's another section of movies where directors and producers try shining light on the issues that certain communities and like groups of teenagers face and the struggles that they face on a regular basis. So do you think that teenagers with disabilities or like chronic illnesses or teenagers from rural areas are portrayed with nuance in current films, or do you find them to be tokenized to a large extent?
I mean, I feel it's pretty. I feel the general tenor of my conversation is it's not been very good for whichever group of teenagers you want to talk about. It's probably been particularly bad for rural teenagers and teenagers with disabilities. I think rural teenagers there actually are almost no movies about them at all. Has been my experience, unfortunately. There are a couple which are useful and are changing it, but I think what's important about those movies is they are not usually explicitly just about teenagers. So like there are some Kelly Reichardt films about like relationships between teenagers and like their parents, for example. Or there is like a movie called like Winter's Bone. And she's like kind of in her 20s, but sometimes it feels like it was Jennifer Lawrence's first movie that got nominated for Oscar for Best Actor for. But like she's not a teenager really. She's actually someone I think in her 20s. But like there definitely was a lot of commentary around then about how there's like because she was a teenager as a person herself, but like how she got really popular and how that movie is about this. But I don't think there's very much direct depictions of people in rural schools, like especially things like what schooling life is for them like. I also feel this maybe if they are depicted, there's like an overemphasis on a hyper stylized like farming or something like that, which is obviously like a useful or a helpful part of being in rural areas, but it's clearly not the only thing that they do. And many of them don't even have jobs within the agricultural industry directly. Like they may work at a mom and pop store. They may like some of them work on oil rigs. So all those sorts of things that just don't get talked about at all. With regards to disabilities, I think there is a stronger attempt at depicting them. I wouldn't but I think the stories that depict them best, unfortunately, do not center their lives or experiences. So, for example, like there's a movie that's called it's the one that John Krasinski directed. It's about everyone who's being silent. I'm completely blanking on the name. Um, I'm gonna literally look up the name right now, but sorry. Uh, what's it called? Quiet Place, yes. So it's like a
Hmm.
Quiet Place, which was she's in a teenager, I guess, to be fair. So it's really tough as well, right? Like there's very few movies that they specifically talk about the adolescent, about the specific experience. It's just more either like young kids in general or like people really in their 20s. But that was the one that had like a person who was deaf, and it portrayed her pretty well. But the movie was not very much about it was partly about her being deaf, but it really was about like the monsters that are chasing all of them and the aliens or whatever. So a lot of the movies that depict people who have disabilities aren't explicitly about them. The ones that are about them, like there are some like shows that I think you can see that have teenagers in schools and that sort of stuff that are operating. I don't think there are like many depictions of people with disabilities. And if they are, it's never like very um prominent. So you don't really get to understand too much of how they're thinking or operating in the real world. I especially feel like it's slowly changing. I think the bits that they're better at showing now are like some mental disabilities like neurodivergence. So like people facing autism or ADHD. But the problem is that also is often overplayed a little bit. So like they will like heighten how deep or significant like the Asperger's syndrome the kid's facing is. And that often means you don't get a chance to like see life from their perspective. And that's I think the other complication with a lot of these movies, which is even if they show kids with these disabilities, they often show them a lot more from the parents or the caretaker's perspective. This is, I think, actually an understandable like perspective to take. Like if you're an adult and you yourself are not neurodivergent, and unfortunately, a lot of people who are like making these movies are not going to be neurodivergent to such an extent, then you will maybe know the life of the caretaker a little bit more than the life of the person actually facing the disability because you don't face the disability yourself. So it might have instances of like the parent taking care of the child and the child like struggling, but you're not seeing much of like what life is like from the perspective of the child, of the teenager. And that often is like quite hard. So yeah, I feel there is not much of it. It used to be much more explicitly tokenized. So people with like ED, there's like a show called like, is it called The Good Doctor or something like that? But like the main actor was like really overhyped in how much and how serious their autism or Asperger's was. Um, but and there often is like the tendency of doing stuff like, the genius savant trope, right? Like the person has like incredible brains or like absurdly good memories when they have like autism, which isn't actually like entirely like particularly true in many instances. So I feel like when they do depict teenagers, the kinds of movies that would be interesting to see, like a person with disabilities, how they interact with friends in the school, how they do things like like college applications, or like going to trade school, or like what do they deal with a parent who's poor. I do not think we see those kinds of movies at all. I think if we see movies about them, it's either like one part of their life is disabilities, but they go to like some really rich fancy school, or like it's not even about them really. It's about their parents' perspective with them.
I know that till that's very interesting, and I know till now the tone of this podcast seems pretty grim. But just to give the viewers of a sense of if things are actually changing, is there a trend towards this misrepresentation, like in the film industry currently changing? And what do you think like film industries can do to make this better while still like retaining their audience and keeping films interesting for viewers?
Um, yeah, I think in terms of if it is improving, this is a little tricky to say. My feeling is no. That's not to say there aren't any movies or TV shows that aren't probably going to have decent depictions. But I feel like most people, if you ask them, will struggle to say what those TV shows and movies are. So part of it is just like a straight up promotion issue. Like, unfortunately, a lot of studios are just in a very like rewatch or like remake sort of mode when it comes to their movies. And when it comes to TV shows, they often still like try and do the same tropes that they've seen before because they feel like that's where you will certainly get a certain number of people watching their movies. So none of them like seem to break out into the zeitgeist or like many people know about that might be depicting it very accurately. Um, I think in terms of like even I guess the movies that I can think of, well, I guess I know more about movies, but like I don't know, like Fault in Our Stars, for example, or like The Theory of Everything, or I don't know, they're probably like some more recent ones. Like almost all of them that are about disabilities aren't even about teenagers. So it feels like a very tiny scope of movies that are about teenagers and that are also about people facing who are also facing disabilities, for example. In terms of whether you can be good, I mean, I guess like I feel like every actor and a ton of directors have been complaining about how Hollywood in particular, but I would say the Western media in general are quite mid or bad when it comes to making new movies or movies that are a bit more interesting or innovative. I would probably also categorize Bollywood into the same bucket. There are probably some regional local movies that are better, but like almost always, it's like a bunch of masala films that are made by the big studios and that are promoted the most with the biggest actors. Um, so the point then is that if the biggest and the second biggest industries in the world are in a very rewatchy or remaking movie state, despite actors and directors' complaints, then it feels like the real reason these movies aren't good is because somebody has decided not to make them or decided not to make them good. So it feels like a very active set of decisions made. Thus, to change it or to make it a lot better, I don't actually think is super hard. I mean, my feeling is just that you just need to involve a couple of people facing the issues you want to talk about, involve them deeply in the script making process, in like their advice when it comes to making the shows. It's often even just really easy to just take in like people who are associated with the disabilities organizations. There's always like an American Deaf League Association, or like there's always something for that specific disability. So there's always people you can reach out to and just have them on as consultants, and you don't even need to pay them like a ton of money to like be involved in it. And then the kind of movies that I think would be interesting to see is like some intersectionality. So like a kid who's facing disability, say they either have a mental issue in terms of like neurodivergence, they have an ADHD problem, or like if it's something more specific in terms of a physical disability, like they either are blind or they like, are handicapped in some fashion. What does life look like for them in school, when they talk to their parents, when they're like looking at college applications, when they are in college, because technically 19-year-olds are still teens. So all of these things, I can't imagine or think of many TV shows or movies that even try to depict this in a normal or reasonable way. And I feel if they do that, like surely some of them will like break through the indie scene. Some of them will get like onto the awards circuit in the United States or in India, and probably trying to get nominated for a bunch of awards. Like instances where this has happened and where a big actor has been involved. Like in India, I would still say like probably one of the biggest example is maybe like Tare Zameen Par, but that movie happened so long ago, and at the time it happened, like everyone was like crazy and raving about it. Even people who didn't always love the way it depicted either the kid or the adult. But like I don't feel you have like many of those movies or TV shows that have broken out of the zeitgeist since then. So I don't think it's hard to do it, but I feel to do it, the corporate incentives of the big studios would have to change in some way. They'd have to be more involved in making indie movies or TV shows, and then indie movies or TV shows specifically about teenagers, and then about teenagers with disabilities. So there are like many steps to go through.
That's fair. I also think like I saw this movie called Wonder. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it's about this kid who has like a facial disformity. And I think it's a really good representation of like life as someone with a problem like that. But I do think there's like some aspect of that missing in media still. I also think like something that's a lot more relatable to a lot of people is like the emotional complexity of teenage life. Like often like teenagers, the way they're represented, they're kind of treated as like a monolith of like this is what the average teen looks like, and it's like either extremely problematic like we talked about before, or like a very tokenistic representation of someone facing issues. So what do you think about like the emotional complexity of like teenage life being simplified or ignored for the sake of drama or comedy, and like what do you think about that?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I do think that it is not generally like there's not much explanation or understanding of the interiority of kids' lives. Um, I do think that this is much tougher to get right as an adult. And I think it's really important to note like most adults who are making these TV shows are like not even in their 20s or their 30s, they're often really in their 40s or 50s. And the reason for this is again, it just takes so much time to break through in the film or TV industry. Like you need a ton of networks or connections. You need a lot of like people to agree to your movie to be like made in this certain way. It takes so much time to break through. And that means like think of the gap, right? Like how many people can say that 50-year-olds have a deep understanding of what teenagers' life is today? How could they? Like literally when they were a teenager, even though it was long ago, and they didn't have things like today's teenagers are probably among the first set of generations who are like entirely like integrated with technology in every aspect of their lives, or are constantly on their smartphones or constantly have social media, which is a very different life than before, or the economy you enter into, whether it's jobs as a trade school or whether it's like going into college, is just quite different from what it used to be before. So getting the interiority right as a teenager is, I think, much harder given the way the industry is set up. The movies that I think have done well. So for example, Eighth Grade is, I think, a movie that has depicted the interiority of a teenager relatively well. It's a movie by Bo Burnham. Um, who probably is a bit more famous as like an internet like comedian and stuff like that. And that movie was like pretty great and pretty accurate. Um, but I think the reason again was because, well, Bo himself was in his early 30s. And two, which is he explicitly got famous because of having very relatable like content or like humor for a bunch of teenagers in their schools or for a bunch of 20-year-olds who were like in college. Which means he was very uniquely positioned to make a movie that is very accurate there. And by accurate, I mean like they depict the interiority, like they depict, for example, anxiety very, very like well, or like the bullying that they face from others as not like an explicit, kids will come and like, like slap you or something like that, but like a much more subtle, like they just exclude you from parties, or like they have like slightly judgmental like questions or something like that. So it felt much more like toned down and more impressive as a result of that. But I do think that it is much harder to depict well unless you have some experience or understanding of people in the, like, of people doing it. Um, I think some TV shows get this better. So there's a TV show called Atypical, which actually is about someone whose face is on the autism spectrum. But like I think that sometimes has some interesting or relatable moments of humor. They get some episodes right. They try and move in that direction. But if you've noticed again, like this is very like Western oriented eccentric so far. So I think in India or in South Korea or actually I feel I've seen like one or two Nigerian films about teenagers, but I do not think they were. I can't remember them. They've been so long ago. But like already the industry is like it's not like globally spread. Like it's easy to say that there are many shows from Africa or from South America, like Latin America telenovelas, but I do still think that they don't become like the largest or most popular movies that everyone else in the world knows about, or like TV shows that everyone else knows about. And so that means A, if they are depicting the interiority of a kid's life well, there's still a very good chance most people in the world will never see it. And two, if they are getting famous, they often are disproportionately getting famous from the West because that's where the biggest streaming services are, like your Netflix or whatever. Um, or Bollywood, I think would say is maybe a second, but it's still not even a very close thing in terms of revenue in a weird way. Like the largest film studios in the USA still make significantly more revenue. Um, even though like the Indian ones get way more eyeballs. So, but the main thing then is that in a lot of these Indian ones, I would still say they don't depict the interiority super well of kids' lives. Like, there's not much nuance in how they talk to each other. There's not like good filmmaking techniques around how to show someone's anxiety, for example, or like when they are confused about a college. I actually don't think I've ever seen a college application ever in a single kids movies and in a single movie about teenagers, which is a little wild. Like they talk about which colleges they have got into, but they don't explain the college application process at all. And they should, because yes, only like 6-7% of the world get into college. But like all these movies are all about like pretty rich or well-off kids. So they don't talk about them applying to college, which I don't know about you, but like when I was in high school, like by ninth grade, I was straight up worried about college all like most of the time. Because every time the pressure was like, what kind of college will you get into? What kind of job will that get you into? What country does that mean you're moving to? So, like, just many basic, like, holes in the system in the way these movies are portrayed. And then, like, if you're not showing some of these processes, how do you show the interiority of, like, a teenager's life at all? It just seems, like, impossible to do so. Um, yeah.
That's pretty interesting. And I've also noticed something similar where it's very hard to accurately like represent teenagers and represent the emotional complexity and the different like struggles they face on a regular basis. And like as a follow-up question, I think apart from this, like as you said, film studios and the film industry as a whole currently continues to make movies about things that have repeatedly worked in the past. So they continue to depict, like for example, like struggles that kids face during exam time specifically, instead of like across the rest of their life, or they continue to depict like romance stories between teenagers because that's something that's attracted eyeballs in the past. So are there like what are some other different aspects of teenagers' lives that have been completely missed by current like film houses and just aren't covered as much?
Yeah. I feel that the types of stories that film studios want to show, either with movies or with TV shows, to be clear, because I think now most people tend to watch TV shows more than movies, is they just want to show what they can dramatize the most. So, like, sexualizing relationships between kids or romantic relationships or like brewing or like bullying incidents in some ways. These seem like the most dramatic ones, and they will over dramatize them because they can sell it on trailers and that sort of stuff a lot more. So the kinds of stories I feel don't get spoken about as much. Sorry. So I think one, as I mentioned, like the college application process, or like trade schools, like what are you planning to do once you leave high school is quite is not portrayed much. I think while there are one or two notable exceptions, I feel kids' interactions or like teenagers' interactions with friend groups is not there. So sometimes they would show like a bunch of really close friends and them just like hanging around and doing shenanigans. And that is fun or fine, but I don't think they show much about like how do you develop the friend group in the first place, or like if I either move to a new school, well, not even move to a new school, but like if I try and join a new club in my school, how do I like develop friends or create friends among a friend group? What do dynamics in that friend group look like? I feel like there is a hole over there when they don't show that. I also feel like kids under like teenagers liking a new sport or club is not shown. So what they will show very much is like a teenager who's already really interested in football, like a bender like Beckham, and then like some competition with it. But they don't explain like what's the first step, which is discovering a new sport or like discovering a new club or a new activity I like to do. Those things I feel do not get spoken about very much. Um, I feel the other thing is, so, for example, parent child relationships. I think there are many stories that depict these. But I think what they depict a lot more are, say, moments of friction or anger, like disagreements or fights, things that are dramatic and that sort of stuff. But they don't show very much like small little problems you might face, like a small daily disagreement with them, or just moments where you do actually connect in a meaningful way. The reason why I think movies and TV shows do not show this is because, again, it doesn't feel like you can make it dramatic enough. So, like, if you ever taken like a screenwriting course, you literally see like the way they teach you to write a story in like Hollywood is almost like they will try and have like a rising action that reaches a climax in the middle of the movie. You will then have like falling action right after that, and then you have like a big bang climax at the end. And constantly, any of the books that you read or any of the screenwriting professors you go to will say, this is boring, make it more interesting, make it fast paced or move it along to the next scene. Or like this is not sufficiently good enough. Or they will focus on huge moments. So even if there are quiet moments of catharsis, they will often only come after a significant area of disagreement or problems. And at first glance, this seems natural because sometimes the way you show a quiet moment between a parent and a child and you make it really emotional is if you make the bit before that scene really emotional, i.e., the level of anger or fighting that you had. The problem obviously is that then it doesn't always feel like super realistic. Like even kids who have like teenagers of problematic relationships with their parents aren't having it like at 100 all the time. Most people like it will change, right? Sometimes it'll be like at a 50 in terms of how angry you all are at each other. Sometimes they're just very happy with each other, having moments of euphoria. So I think the daily like minutiae of life, those I think are very rarely depicted in movies about teenagers. So that I think is a problem that could be resolved. Um, I also feel like teenagers movies show like way too much of focus on romance in general. Um, which is a little bit surprising or odd because I do feel like a lot of people, well, okay, empirically it is true, statistically, like people under the age of 18 are, if anything, like they do not do or aren't way like half as like, I don't know, like sexually explicit or anything like that compared to prior generations. And I also feel like there's a significant percentage of people who go into college without like ever having anything akin to a romantic relationship or anything like that. And there's no attempt to normalize it or consider it as useful, as considered as a good thing. There's no attempt to even like just have a person's life just be about the friends that they are having or just about the work that they are doing. There's always like a romantic component to it. So it would be nice, I think, to see more TV shows and movies that don't have any romance at all. Because I just feel it's also real world true to many people. And I also feel like many people for who don't have like, who've never like had a sexual partner or a romantic relationship, those like teenagers would, I think, be glad to know that they aren't like abnormal. When like the statistics show they're objectively not abnormal. Like the majority of kids, of people in their first year of college, do not actually have a sexual partner at all. You just don't know it at all because every media like significantly over sexualizes it, or like is constantly talking about like either like their first romantic partner or like hookup culture or something when they're a 19-year-old. So it would be nice to have like stories that aren't about this at all. I don't think they're gonna come anytime soon, because unfortunately like media just tends to romanticize romance a lot. But that's another thing that I think is underrepresented.
So do you think like a recurring like theme I've been noticing is like a lot of this is tied to what, like for example film school tells you to do, or what example, like for example producers tell you to do. Do you think a part of that is like how people think and how civic sense has evolved? Like is is there a reason why, even though like there's like a general recognition of the fact that like these are just bad and like tokenistic representations that no one wants to see, like studios and schools like still don't change? Like what do you think the reason behind that is?
Yeah. So the simplest one to me, as we've hinted at, is these actually are not a very big slice of movies or TV shows in general. Like if you think about the most common or popular movies or TV shows you can think about, um, teenagers is a weirdly small subsection of it. There are some empirical reasons for this. So there is always like a worry that teenagers like have least loyalty to say a Netflix or to like a HBO. They're just quite happy to switch and flip between several of them all the time. Teenagers are often also seen as like the least important in terms of money. So if you want to like pay for your streaming service, or if you want people to like pay for your movie, you don't go to the teen, right? You go to the main purchase maker, which is the adult who's buying it for them. So it feels more important to appeal to the adult than it is to directly appeal to the teen. Um, so that's why I feel you have a lot more movies that are like superheroes, or like maybe some horror movies. There are a lot of horror movies I feel I see a lot more of now. Or TV shows that may also have like superheroes, or like a bunch of like action, or like fantasy and stuff like that. Or they're often really based on past IP, like I don't know, some Lord of the Rings or like some IP or like the Foundation TV series or something like that. So what this then means is if you don't talk much about, if you have very small percentage of movies and TV shows about teenagers, then the odds of getting them right seems even smaller because you don't do enough research into what might make for a good teenage film. You are not certain, even if you make a good or less dramatic teenage film, that a film studio will pick it up, that a Hollywood exec might say, okay, let's make this movie. You're not certain you'll ever get that. And it's, I think, even worse because a lot of teenagers still come under like child protection laws, which means very basic considerations. One, they cannot work the same number of hours as an adult can. So a lot of adults, if you know, when they're working on a film or a movie, they can work for like 15, 16 hours a day. A child is legally in the United States not allowed to work those same hours. They need an adult supervising them at all times. So all these things add huge compliance costs for any movie or TV or like TV show. So they just don't do it. Or if they do it, they will like hire like some 25 or 27-year-old to try and like, put them in that role, right? Because they're technically an adult and they can make him do that. So accuracy just doesn't need to come to the forefront at all. If out of the small percentage of teen movies they make, they want to pick the movies that are cheaper to make rather than like easier than are like harder to do. But secondly, which is I feel like this is kind of true on most genres across Hollywood now. I think if you point out to most of them, there is a general feeling or sense that they aren't having the same level of like nuance or like innovation or care. They seem to be a lot more like remake oriented or heavy. And I think this also influences the kind of teen movies that get made. So if you know making a good TV show or movie, like writing a good script takes a lot of time. You have to ensure your nuances, the dialogue is coming right. You'll often rewrite it a lot of the times. I need a film studio to sign off on it because they will get the final say. So they can always just say no at any point. They can say like, no, this seems too boring. I need a bit more dramatic. Or they can just say like, I'm not sure how to promote this in the trailers, because it isn't like enough like pizzazz or bang. So while there are a couple of TV shows that are, I think, standing out, like I think atypical, there was a TV show called Freaks and Geeks, which was problematic and did have like it was a UK show, but had like a lot of like over drug use and like romantic relationships. It also had like a fair bit of authenticity in other areas, and it also depicted poor kids, which I feel most TV shows do not do, most movies do not do. Like they do not show like the lives of poor children living in bad public schools. It's much more like pretty rich or good to do private or public schools. Um, so all of this is to say that yeah, I don't like I don't think that I don't think they will make any change unless they have these teen movies be a larger percentage of the movies they want to sell. They think that there is a big market in selling them. And at bare minimum, even if they make the same number of teenage movies, at least the people they choose to hire for it, they're willing to let them get away with making, say, small indie productions of 5 to 10 million bucks, that aren't like super dramatic or over the top, and then hope that some of them like get onto the award circuit, maybe at best get nominated for Oscars, but like at least like get nominated for like a couple of like your small Sundance awards. They need to either give the people making the shows a bit more free rein, or they need to just make more shows. Without either of those things changing, I do not think that you will get many better portrayals of teens. I I will say like I think social media, because we've spoken a lot about like created art, but like a lot of media is also like social media or like YouTube influencers. And that I think is the capacity to be a lot better and more authentic. Although that also has its own problems or biases, right? Because you are just listening to one creator talking about their own life. And by definition, the creator who becomes popular is no more in touch with the thing that made them popular quite often, right? Like if you made like 10 million subscribers, you're getting brand deals left and right. You're getting money the kind you haven't got before. You don't need to go into a traditional college job. So then they lose touch. So social media is better, but it's still pretty imperfect. So I think this is why it hasn't changed.
Yeah, that's fair. Also, like in general, with the advent of social media and stuff, like I think there's also been a shift to like more short form content, more short films online, and like generally shorter movies as well. Do you think that has made depictions of teenage life like more surface level, for example?
This is interesting. I am actually inclined to believe that it can make it better. And I feel I've seen like more short films like that randomly the YouTube algorithm sends to me, or like that pop up on like some YouTube channel that can be pretty interesting or useful, right? Because sometimes you can just give like a 10 or 15 minute snippet of like one situation a teenager faces that's very, very relatable. And then it drives engagement as a lot of people like the video, a lot of people comment positively about it. Some people may even share it with their friends. And that I think can lead to a good like positive race, to just create better of the short form content. So I think it has the potential to be better. It can obviously be more surface level. So it really just depends on the quality of the video. And the problem really there is that the people who make the short form videos are just like it's really expensive to make a good quality production. You need lighting to be in the exact right ways. You need your editing to be done really well. You need music that ties in well with it. And obviously, you also need a script that works well with a short film. And a lot of them don't have that. There'll always be like really weird, awkward pauses, or like it doesn't seem professionally shot. Or even if it is, I personally find some of them a little too cringy or like on the nose dialogue. Like the dialogue is just really on the nose. So in those instances, like it's not super easy. So I think short form content can and probably has in some ways made it better. Like there are probably some more authentic YouTubers who talk about teenagers' daily lives or short form video or short films that maybe might be cool, but they don't get like popular in the same way, right? Like even a popular like short video is nowhere near like the same number of people who see even like a not very successful movie, right? Not very successful movie is just like it's distributed across hundreds of theaters in a country. Um, so what that then means is it can make it better, but they aren't getting as popular. And it's not always clear that the people making them can make them with the same basic quality standards as we are used to seeing. Like I switch on a Netflix TV show, the script quality may be like terrible, but the production value is not like throwing me off. I'm not seeing like dingy or bad lighting or like a really weird camera angle or like very bad sound production. You can see that in any short film. So or in any YouTube video. So it takes time. I do think it'll be getting better though, because now there is like a lot of really cheap um mics, um sound editing software. that are pretty accessible and that are pretty good quality. So my hope is this is going to be a good way it will go, and it might perhaps push studios just via competitive pressure if they want to like not lose out to YouTube all the time to make the kind of movies or TV shows that will actually be appealing to them. But the problem is it can also do the inverse, which I think it's actually doing, which is they think, okay, YouTube has cornered the market on realistic videos or short films for like teenagers. We can't even get that market. We're just going to focus on like big bang special effects that will really get people to come and sit in the theaters. Um, so I think it can be better. It can be surface level. I feel like it's been better in many instances. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And to summarize, currently teenagers are being grossly misrepresented in unnuanced ways, and this is disproportionately affecting certain smaller sections like people who have disabilities or like certain groups of people. My question is the current like what adds on to all of these problems is that currently teenagers aren't aware that the media industry is like misrepresenting what the average life of a teenager is. So the media industry continues to shape people's perceptions of the world. It sets standards for what teenagers think is cool or what's normal. And my question is, in the very long term, like let's say 8 or 10 years, even if we can't change the way media houses operate because they still want to earn profit, is there a way we can make people approach the narratives that TV shows set with some amount of caution or prevent them from immediately believing what they see on TV shows or movies and accepting that to be the truth immediately?
Yeah, that's fair. I think the problem is it really depends on the teenager and how you're approaching them. So I feel like, for better or for worse, the first line of defense is always the parents. But the problem I usually feel is that parents are usually too restrictive or harsh, or like giving too many comments or instructions to the kids. And that's often a really bad way of actually getting any real control over them. Because to be clear, you're like, an 18 or 17-year-old will always be able to find a way, even in a lower middle income household, to like watch the shows that they want or like check out the movies that they want, right? Like they can always go and do it with their friends. They can always talk to their friends. In some instances, they're even incentivized to go further away from what the parents tell them to do. So like there needs to be like a lot of open trust and communication so that you can genuinely say like here are the reasons why this kind of media is something to take with a lot of caution. Like you probably do not want a kid influenced by 13 reasons why in terms of like excessive romanticization of suicide, right? Like clearly. But if you're like a really like depressed 13-year-old and you feel like your parents aren't people you can talk about these issues too comfortably, you're going to go on social media. You're going to try and find whatever forums you can. You're going to try and see if a TV show or movie speaks to you. And that is something you are happy to do with very little caution. Because if you're really depressed or sad or deeply anxious, you are looking for any kind of catharsis you can, wherever you get it. Like it's a very understandable impulse to look at bad quality, like I should really say inaccurate TV shows or movies if they happen to just emotionally speak to you. And that can mean that you romanticize these things yourself. You sometimes are at risk of trying some of these problems yourself, or like trying drugs or smoking or something, which is like, I mean, like, whether it's good or bad in things, like it is objectively scientifically bad for your health. So it's probably not good to get addicted to these things. So what this then means is that the first line of defense to try and indulge a bit more caution into the people who are most influenced by bad media are the parents, and they need to do this with a lot more like openness and communication, a lot more trust in the children as well, a lot less like preachiness or instructiveness, a lot less anger. Those I think will be like one really helpful state. The second state is obviously like maybe your friends. Um, I think so. Okay, my honest feeling is that I think a significant majority of like teenagers don't actually aren't directly influenced by other teenage media to influence their own real world actions. So like as in by teenage media, I mean like movies or TV shows, either because they could just easily dismiss them as unrealistic, or the kinds of things they really enjoy watching have nothing to do with teenagers. Like it's some cool superhero or action movie or some cool thriller or horror. I think what they're more influenced by is social media. So like your TikTok videos, your YouTube ones, your like comments that your celebrity puts up or like your friends or whatever put up. And I think the main thing to take caution with over there is it's a tough thing to do, but just to like try not to have any heroes or heroines or whatever. Like you really don't want to trust too deeply into anything any celebrity is saying. Like, even if they mean well, even if they try and say the right things, they just live a very different life from you, for better or for worse. Um, like they see people, they do things, they go for parties or whatever, or like they have money that you do not. They don't have to worry about the same things you do. And the other problem is like a lot of the celebrities or the people who get like really like well off, there's a bad selection bias, which is they are the people who were successful. So they might like tell you to do things or like say that these are good career paths or like this life is easy to live in, but that's just based on their own experiences, which means that they may not be aware that there are many other people who failed, who've tried the exact same things these rich people or successful people have. Like a lot of times people who get successful get it by a combination of luck, a reasonable amount of privilege, so obviously some amount of money, a fair amount of like parental or family connections or networks. So when you don't immediately have these connections and that sort of stuff, it's easy to just like believe that the person whom you love the most, when they tell you to do something or to buy something, for you to just go headlong into it. And what's better is to understand that even if they're a good person and they made a really cool piece of art or they sung a song that you really like, that doesn't mean that you should trust everything they say at face value. That's like a good mental check for teenagers to try and have themselves. Or even if they like, it's sometimes it's hard to have it on things you like, but I think it's easier to have it on things your friends like. Like you can call your friends out a little bit more because you are more objective, right? You're more neutral. You may not be obsessed with the same things they are. So if friends can check each other, that can probably be helpful in some ways. So even if like it shouldn't stop you, and I don't think it will stop you from like still loving your favorite song or loving your favorite movie or TV show. But just the actor who's in that movie or TV show is not someone whom you like glorify always. And not like listen to everything they say as like on face value. So that's probably also helpful in terms of friends and trying to talk to each other a little bit. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, so it is like, I agree, pretty difficult to strike the balance for most parents. So parents need to simultaneously be restrictive enough for their kids to prevent their kids from consuming certain sorts of media, and and also not be too restrictive and too unreasonable. But I think this is getting better to an extent. So you're like, for example, you're seeing more reviews of films that are catered to parents. So like ratings for like films based on how like child friendly they are, or like ratings based on like different categories of age, so that you know like what movies it's fine to like show your kids or allow your kids to watch. So I think there's a trend of this getting better, but we're still a long way from parents like doing like the perfect job of showing only those films to their kids which actually give them more knowledge, and preventing their kids from seeing films that are unnuanced or unrepresentative of what teenagers actually face.
So I actually may like I guess it's I should give at least one hot take on this one but to just make it interesting. But like my actual feeling is I think parents should show them the bad, unnuanced ones. And I think it's even okay to allow like I feel the best way to do this is not to like restrict from the get-go, watch media to see and not to see, but really to try and give like a running commentary on media the kids have seen. By which I mean like it's okay to let them even see a little bit of problematic shows so long as you tell them explicitly, here is why logically I think these shows will be bad for your mental health or bad for your physical like well-being. And I think like a lot of children will actually be pretty open or receptive to that. Like I think if you frame it as like a this is a restrictive thing you can never do, I think a teenager will either be naturally curious or he'll be a little annoyed because the parent sounds like someone who is not understanding who or where they are, where they're coming from. But I think if it's much more like, um, it's okay if you see this even, like you can try and check it out. But I will warn you, here is why this is problematic, or here's where this is wrong. Then I think that opens dialogue in like a more interesting way because then now the teenager may feel, okay, I don't need to see this out of my own accord because logically it makes sense that like seeing like really glorified amounts of blood or gore in a movie about suicide is not something I want to see. Or they may even be like, okay, I'm kind of curious. I'm still going to check it out. And then the parent can just be like, look, feel free to come at me, talk at me when I'm like free in the weekend or free one evening at home. Um, we can just chat over this. And I think that open conversation is more helpful in giving parents the ability to guide what is good and what is not good rather than like hard restrictions. Because I think everyone is naturally curious and everyone should have the right to either make their own mistakes or, frankly speaking, parents may not always have it right too, right? They may obviously think like a show is just not good at all for kids. But like once you see it, you're like, wait, hold on, this is like perfectly fine, and may even have like good messages. And especially if your parents are like somewhat conservative or traditional, then it's very unclear that the movies or TV shows they choose to restrict are like actually bad movies or bad TV shows, right? Like there is like a movie like Lady Bird, for example. It shows like the main character having like premarital sex or like drinking, but the movie, I would argue, is still like pretty good or essential viewing because it doesn't excessively glorify that. And the parts about her that are most human and most important are the parts that have nothing to do with this, but like about her love for her hometown or something like that. Like the arc of change of how a character matures or grows is the type of stories that parents may completely dismiss because the place where the character starts up is bad. If you think the place where the character starts up is bad, then you may just not let them watch the movie at all. But it may be really important to watch that movie actually for the teenager. So parents may not know what's best. I'm not going to say they do. But that's again why I think having an open dialogue or conversation is helpful. Because then you can also get convinced by a teenager. Like this is a teenager, right? This is like a 14-year-old. They're not like a 7-year-old. So they have thoughts and ideas of their own. And they are probably influenced. Like this generation is going to be the most educated generation as compared to any prior generation, right? In terms of how many go to school, how many finish eighth grade, for example, how many even reach to 12th grade. So that means they clearly know something. So it's worth, I think, just having the dialogue and openly discussing, like, here's why I think it's not great, being convinced by it one way or the other way. Um, but I think that is just way easier than trying to strike the right balance. Because I agree, striking the right balance is hard. And I feel the easiest thing is like, I would almost go so far as to say that the easiest thing is just to like radically say, you can watch whatever you want. Feel free to tell me. I will not shout or scream or judge at all. I will just tell you, like, here's might be a good idea, here's what might not be a good idea. You watch it. You come back to me in the evening. Let's talk about it. It'll be fun. Something like that. That I think might be a good way of going about it.
Yeah, I think that suggestion on like parents and the way they should like interpret this makes perfect sense. But I also think like an important stakeholder that often goes unnoticed and like putting more pressure on these movies to be more representative is also like celebrities themselves. Like the fact that they themselves often have cults of personality and so many people like see themselves in these celebrities and like want to be like them. No matter the character that they play, I think they also need to be called out more for like setting false hopes and expectations. And like I think there's a sense of self-recognition there that's very important. And I think it's fair to say that we need to hope to see more of that in the future as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think calling out celebrities would always be good. I do think in some instances, like it gets a little too like too intense or too excessive. Even by well-meaning fans, like there are instances where like people have been explicitly outed as being like gay or like LGBT because there was a whole worry that originally they were acting in movies as an LGBT character, but they themselves were straight. So they can obviously like go a bit too far. I do agree that I think calling out is a good mechanism, and a very helpful one in getting celebrities to try and like moderate or change their minds. I think so. In a weird way, I actually wish the people who got more popular were not just like the actors in the shows, but like the directors, the screenwriters, the film studios who are like approving this. Like, I wish the callouts were like really focused on some of the real big movers and shakers. Celebrities are pretty big movers and shakers themselves, there's no doubt about it. But quite often, a lot of the criticism we have is at the way a play, like a movie is written. Like, no, it's not very often we're like critiquing the way an actor has portrayed the performance, right? Like, in some ways, they're not a puppet, but like they definitely are like they're just giving the lines that they are being told to give. They are one part of the story. So I think celebrity callouts are good, but I think if we actually gave a lot more direct recognition to the people who are writing the stories and directing it, to the people who are like producing this, like if there was more criticism of Warner Brothers or something, I think that would go like so far towards making some kinds of change because they will feel very more directly attacked. Whereas right now, I think what they have a tendency to do as a studio like executive is like, well, okay, that movie was a dud, it failed. Let's move on and find the next. But if they are held to account for every dud, not just by like their shareholder boss, but like by the public directly, then they will think, okay, we have a reputation as a studio to maintain, and now we're going to change what that reputation looks like. This is happening in some ways. So, for example, like most people I speak to now don't love the MCU anymore. And that's very explicitly associated with Disney, who is the main studio that's producing it, right? So Disney itself is having to pivot Star Wars is having the same, I think, like cultural problem with it, right? I mean, maybe it's changing with the recent TV show, but with Andor, but most of it is still like people don't like it. So Disney maybe has that reputation, but that's also because Disney has like Disney movies, which is really famous. But like, I don't think that same reputation exists with like Warner Brothers, with Paramount, like with Universal. If I had to ask people what they thought was the latest Paramount or Universal movie, they wouldn't know it. But if I told them that like Mission Impossible was like the latest Universal movie, they know the Mission Impossible franchise. Was it Paramount or Universal? One of them. But like, even I'm forgetting. So, but like, you know the franchise. So we should try and like make it sticky, make the reputation stick to the studio, not just I think the celebrity. That I think will help more.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take, and I agree completely. And let's hope that in the future these trends of misrepresentation and surface level representation change for the better. And Pranav, we're nearing the end of this podcast episode, so I just wanted to thank you for coming on our podcast and making time on a Sunday morning to come and spend time breaking down some really complex issues on our podcast. And this was a very, very informative, like 45 minutes, half an hour. So thank you
Mhm.
so much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. This is fun. Enjoyed it.